Welcome to the March InForum Partnership Breakfast. It's great to see all of you here this morning. We have a great conversation planned for all of you. Alongside your agenda, on the back actually of the agenda, you'll see a child well-being map. And after our speakers give their presentations this morning on power and trust, and how that intersects with race and place and poverty, which is a mouthful. In their work, you are going to have an opportunity to have a conversation at your tables, a small group activity where you're going to be asked to have a conversation about how you have encountered challenges in your work about power and trust. And then we're going to open up that conversation and have a dialogue in the room here where you will ask or share what you learned and what you discussed with our panelists here. And they will provide feedback and share back with you what they're hearing and what they have experienced in their own work. Any meetings, public meetings where folks in the room can be invited, we're going to use electronically something called menti.com. So if you have public meetings or events where folks in the room or others that you want to make an announcement where people should be aware of something that you're having, you can go to menti.com. We'll put the information up on the screen for you. And we'll also have it available online for people to access later. So that people can know about your event, and that way it'll show up on the screen. So we'll announce a couple of events that are related to the United Way of Greater Atlanta, but then if there's something that you want people to be aware of, you can announce that here as well. So we'll continue forward now. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the President and CEO of the United Way of Greater Atlanta, Milton Little, Jr. Milton.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good to have all of you here. Those of you who are new may not know the purpose of InForum, but it's a time for us to gather. People come to see one another, to learn from one another, to see the world through the eyes of someone else, and to understand where our similarities are and how we maximize those, and take a look at our differences and realize how small they are and how meaningless they can be sometimes, but how great an obstacle they can become often to the work that we need to do, to where our missions all seem to intersect around this idea that working together we can make Atlanta a better place for all people. And so InForum is a place for us to have those conversations and to see one another. United Way a couple of years ago embarked on a focused agenda. Our board embraced this enthusiastically, but it's all about how we can help provide leadership to this region in the work of ensuring that every individual, particularly every child, no matter where they live, has the greatest opportunity to achieve at the greatest potential their life has to offer. Those of you who've been in this room often enough know we talk about place all the time, how place can be an obstacle, a barrier. It can automatically consign you to a life of poverty. Our task is to make place irrelevant to the life circumstances, to life span, to educational outcomes, to income, to all the things that we all ought to take for granted as ingredients to make sure we can live a long and prosperous life. We need to make sure every obstacle, particularly the obstacles embedded in place, can be taken away. But this work's going to require us to sort of act differently, think differently. We're going to have to build a culture of collaboration. And I want to emphasize that word collaboration. Some of you have heard me say this before. I've been doing this work a long time. When I first started this work, a wizened person explained to me what the definition of collaboration was. And she said the definition of collaboration is an unnatural act between non-consenting adults. And some of you have sort of lived this work and you realize that collaboration is one of those things you get brought to kicking and screaming sometimes. But we've got to figure out how we can sort of change that definition and make collaboration something you run to and engage in fully not try to avoid or engage in only as a last resort. And so it's all about how this cultural change can take place, how we can build the broadest collaboration and coalition across every sector to bring Atlanta to sort of the prominence that Andrew Young once described Atlanta as potentially the greatest American city in the 21st century. But we've got to do some things now to make sure that that dream, that vision of Atlanta gets realized. If you were in this room last month, you were part of a conversation on power. And we talked a little bit about power in the room, power in each one of us, power in collaboration in our organizations, but sort of that power that is inside each of us. And if we can bring it all together and tie our power with somebody else's against that sort of grand vision of what we want Atlanta to look like, then we can truly make good things happen. So we're going to engage today in a conversation that often is described as one of those things you got to bring courage to. And is that conversation about sort of the intersection of race and poverty and place. I had one of our donors come see me, and he's asked me not to sort of mention his name, but he wants me to tell the story. And he's been involved in some of the most significant things that have happened in Greater Atlanta, particularly around sort of saving some major institutions. And he said, you know, that work most recently has taken the veil off my eyes. I didn't realize how difficult the conversation of race could be in this community and how much it sort of influences a whole lot of that happens. And he looked at me and he said, if we can't have, as a community, an honest conversation about race and its influence on education and income and health and other kinds of disparities, then all this work that we're going to do is only going to be 10% of what needs to be done. And so we've got to have that conversation, and you can't just have the race conversation in this room. You can't have that conversation in Race Day in Leadership Atlanta. You know, we've got to have that conversation on race in those places where impact is possible, in those places where policy and practice and a commitment to engagement all take place. And if we can't talk about race and its influence there and how we sort of deal with it in a proactive and in an embracing and in loving way. Race ought not be something that distinguishes us in any meaningful way. It ought to simply be another part of the diversity that we celebrate and find ways to bring together. So we're going to have that conversation today about power and trust and race and the intersection, all of those systemic kinds of things that get in the way of the work that we're doing. So I am thankful that you've all joined us this morning. And if I'm going to do like they do on the plane, if you're not here for the destination I just described, you know, the door's there and you can sort of head out, because that's what we're here to talk about. And so I'm just making sure everybody in this room is going to that same destination. So fasten your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen, and be part of this. And so before we get started, I want to just take an opportunity to make sure as quickly as we can you all know who's in the room. So we're going to just ask you to quickly say your name and your organizational affiliation. And so we're going to start with Miss Laura over there. She's going to walk around with the mic. So, you know, pick anybody and get them started.
Good morning. My name is Laura Hyman. I'm project manager at United Way of Greater Atlanta.
Hi, Rick Aronson, Jewish Family and Career Services.
Chandra Farley, Director of the Just Energy Program at Partnership for Southern Equity.
Hi, Esther Grissom, board member of the Andrew P. Stewart Center.
Hi, I'm Andy Roach, Georgia State University.
Delano Ford with Teach for America.
Not sure two mics works. Tiziana Deering, designated talker.
Sarah with United Way.
Christy Naylor, Cobb Senior Services.
Paige McKay-Cubic with the Fraser Center.
Sarah Fleeman, United Way.
Jerica Richardson, a member of the business community, Hack Out Ninja.
Janet Tharp, J&L Advisors.
Utoya Gappy Wooten, Foundation Center. I'm Ashley Yates with the Fulton DeKalb Hospital Authority.
Good morning, Magdalene Yunker, Emory University and Grady Hospital.
Aisha Parham, Fatherhood Liaison for the DeKalb Access Resource Center.
Aisha Williams with Healing the West Side Community Health Workers.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sarah Craning, and I'm from Children's Healthcare of Atlanta.
Sarah Flesher, Endurance Project Management.
Johnny Thomas, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, embedded in the community as a part of the Healthy Beginnings system of care.
Tamika Askew, Urban League of Greater Atlanta.
Good morning, Charles Walker, Urban League of Greater Atlanta.
Good morning, Ellen Cochran. I'm the Senior Director for Early Learning and Development at the United Way.
Good morning, Catherine Stolarski, Director of Women's Leadership Initiatives at United Way.
Good morning, I'm Tom McCarron with Westside Volunteer Corps.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Glenda Harris, Executive Director of Communities and Schools of Henry County.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Davis. I'm with Shelter in Arms.
I'm Antonetta McKay, and I'm with Atlanta Habitat for Humanity.
Good morning. I'm Constance Franklin with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Good morning. I'm Latoya Ferris with Covenant House, Georgia.
Good morning. I'm Regina Jennings, Director for Support Services at Covenant House, Georgia.
Good morning. Terrence Dong, Realtor at Palmer House Properties.
Hello, I'm Imani Crosby. I'm the mentoring program coordinator at Yales Inc.
Good morning, I'm Tedra Perkins, School-Based Mental Health Coordinator at Odyssey Family Counseling.
Hi, I'm Jenny Castillo.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ashley Robinson. I'm with Blue Institute. Well, Jenny and I are with Blue Institute. We're a training program that recruits, trains, and places young people of color into electoral campaigns across the South and Southwest.
Good morning, I'm Chris Sally. I'm the fundraising specialist at Yales Inc.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Christina Rodriguez. I'm the after-school program coordinator and lead teacher at Yales Inc.
My name is Jessie Tran, and I'm with Atlanta Habitat for Humanity.
Good morning. My name is Garfield Ruddock. I'm with Enterprise Holdings.
Hi, Tori Norris with the Cousins Family Foundation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Natrell Tootle, and I'm from Mary Hall Freedom House. I'm the development coordinator.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Charmaine Davis. I'm with the U.S. Department of Labor's Women's Bureau.
Good morning. I'm Roy Reese from Morehouse School of Medicine.
Ann Daney, United Way of Greater Atlanta.
Susan Burton Ashe, United Way.
Liza Loss, Community Assistance Center.
Good morning, I'm Shelby Utter. I'm a registered dietitian with Open Hand Atlanta.
Hi, I'm Catherine Bailey with Atlanta Habitat for Humanity.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Melaine Ferdinand King, and I'm a programming fellow with Blue Institute and a current student at Spelman College.
Good morning. I'm Barbara Richardson with Boys and Girls Clubs of Metro Atlanta.
Good morning. My name is Kadeem Harrison, Outreach and CAM Coordinator with the Sickle Cell Foundation of Georgia.
Good morning. My name is Jackie George. I'm with the Sickle Cell Foundation of Georgia, and I'm a genetic counselor.
Hi, my name is Michelle Kuntz. I'm a community dietitian with Open Hand.
Hello, I'm Alex Lane. I'm a dietitian at Open Hand as well.
Good morning. My name is Sandra Achuri, and I am with the Latin American Association.
Good morning. My name is Erica Wright, and I'm the founder of You First Incorporated, supporting our homeless men and women and children in the Atlanta area.
Good morning. I'm Pamela Berry with You First.
Kwaku Forrestal with the Annie Casey Foundation.
Buenos días, Aníbal Torres, Latin American Association.
Elaine Hunter, DeKalb Advisory Board, United Way.
Pierre Story, Funding a Dream Foundation.
Good morning, I'm Laura Keefe with Yale's, or Youth Empowerment Through Learning, Leading, and Serving.
Faye Dresner with Jewish Family and Career Services.
Armin D. Drew, Senior Consultant at Giant Worldwide.
Jane Hubbard, Leadership Coach and Consultant.
Karen Rogers, Director of Community Development, the Atlanta Police Foundation.
Rebecca Brubaker, Chief Development Officer at the Atlanta Police Foundation.
Good morning. I'm Bill Wallace. I'm Chair of the Cobb United Way Advisory Board.
Good morning. I'm Alana Washniak, Board Member on the Regional Commission on Homelessness.
Good morning. I am Allison Todd, Corporate Relations Manager at United Way of Greater Atlanta.
Natasha Harrison with Community Build Ventures.
Hannah Tweel, United Way of Greater Atlanta.
Ashton Brasher, also United Way of Greater Atlanta.
Liz Ward, also with United Way of Greater Atlanta.
I think I'm the only person that's not with the United Way. Yuri Owens, the Partnership for Southern Equity.
Good morning, Jeff Smythe with Lutheran Services of Georgia.
Good morning, Lauren Rock, United Way of Greater Atlanta.
Good morning, Calvin Ward, Fulton County Representative for the United Way of Greater Atlanta.
Good morning, Amy Korn, Global Payments.
Good morning. I'm Callie Marshall, the founder of Esprit de Merci. We do leadership coaching and consulting.
Good morning, Katrina Mitchell, Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services.
Good morning, I'm Robin Busty with Archie and the Georgia Health Policy Center.
Melissa Austin with Lutheran Services of Georgia.
Good morning, I'm Bette Vandiver, and I'm with GEARS, the Georgia Early Education Alliance for Ready Students.
Good morning, my name is Megan Jackson. I'm with GEARS as well.
Good morning, Bonnie Moskovich, clinical psychologist, self-employed, private practice.
Good morning, I'm Abby Russell, and I'm with Playworks Georgia.
Good morning, I'm Jackie Anthony, Social Work Coordinator at Atlanta Public Schools.
Good morning, I'm Jovan Trias, aka Joe Tolliver, founder and director of Open Hearts, Open Minds, Open Mouths LLC, where your ideas are fearless investments for your community, and also volunteer coordinator for Rainbow Village, Inc.
Good morning, I'm Michelle Schreiner, Board Chair of Athena's Warehouse. We focus on educating and empowering under-resourced teen girls.
Good morning, I am Kim Owens, the Parent Liaison for Brown Middle School, Atlanta Public School, and I also serve on the Fayette County Advisory Board.
Good morning, I'm Paula Dressel with Just Partners, Inc.
Good morning, I'm Sandra Barnhill, founder and national president of Forever Family.
Good morning, I'm Sam Alenikoff with College AIM.
Rohit Malhotra, Center for Civic Innovation, and a Milton Little groupie.
Did we get everyone?
Just had to mess that up, huh? Well, thank you. Thanks for just taking the time to do that. I'd like to ask Rick Aronson to make his way to the stage. Rick is the CEO of Jewish Family and Career Services. He's been there since 2004. He is a member of the United Way Board. He serves as the agency liaison, bringing the agency perspective to the board's deliberation. He's a trained attorney, but most importantly, he's my friend. And so, Rick Aronson, please come to the stage.
Good morning. I have the unenviable task of following Milton, which is always a tough place to be on a podium. Milton, thank you for your remarks and for your leadership. You know, listening and hearing everybody that's here today, I really have to tell you that from a partner's perspective, this does feel different. Like Milton and like many of you, I've been doing this work for a long time. And I feel genuinely that United Way is convening us in new and different ways, that we are coming together toward a common cause, and that only by working together we will make the difference that we need to make in this community. InForum really is this coming together. It's one of many things that United Way is doing to kick off these important discussions. We're coming together, we're connecting, we're getting to know each other, and we're learning and growing together. We don't want this to be forced collaboration. We want this to be working together on one solution and rallying behind one solution to truly make an impact and to change this child well-being impact score to a higher number. Just a moment to share something personal and one of the many reasons why I care about this initiative. I had the privilege recently of spending the day at Booker T. Washington High School, and I was matched up with a young man who was the same age as my son, Danny. They were alike in so many ways, their aspirations, their age, their personality, what they like to do. And yet, only because of this young man, Michael's circumstances, he's fighting for his life. He's fighting for his life while my son is living through life without a care or a worry in the world. And I ask all of you, and I asked my son and my wife, is this equitable? Is this what we want to be as a community? The answer is no, and I'm glad that you all are here with me to help move us forward. I have the honor today of introducing our two speakers with slightly challenging names, but I'm going to do my best to say them right. The first is Tiziana Deering. We were practicing earlier. Tiziana, and I can only say it if I go like this. She is a professor at the Boston College School of Social Work, co-director of the Center for Social Innovation, and founding co-director of research in school economic and environmental equity, also known as RISE 3. Her current teaching focuses on social innovation and leadership. She writes on poverty and inequity, especially in urban environments, and social justice in public policy. Look forward to hearing from you, Tiziana. And Rohit Malhotra. Yes? Thank you. And John Smith is here too. Is anybody? I'm just kidding. Rohit is the founder and executive director of the Center for Civic Innovation in Atlanta, his hometown city. His background is in social entrepreneurship, digital communications, open data, and community organizing. Most recently, he served as an ASH Innovation Fellow in the White House Office of Management and Budget, focused on the administration's efforts around social impact bonds and pay for performance. I've heard Rohit speak today, and I've read all the information that Tiziana provided, and I want to say we are in for a real treat today. Thank you both for coming, and thank you all for your attention and participation. Enjoy the morning.
Good morning. How are you? Good. I'm glad to hear it. Thank you for having me today. Before I start, I want to acknowledge two things that I want to ask that we stipulate two things. All right, so let's start with the acknowledgements. This is a conversation on trust and power and the intersection of race, place, and poverty, and I have come to Atlanta from Boston to talk about it. I am acutely aware of Boston's reputation. I think we have a deserved reputation in Boston, given our history, and I recognize and want to acknowledge the irony of coming down from Boston to Atlanta to talk about the intersection of race, place, and poverty. But we have many lessons that we're working on learning in Boston, so all I can do is humbly submit those lessons to you. The second thing is I'm white, and I was born white, and I'm always going to be white, and it's a different thing to be a white woman talking about race. I just want to submit that I'm aware of that unique position, but also sometimes as a white woman, I can say things that people will receive in a way that people of color can't. And so I just want to acknowledge that as well, and then boldly go forward. I prayed really hard before I came up here that what I had to say would be of service to you and your learning and your conversations, and so hopefully coming from those two places, that will be the case. So then I think we have to stipulate two things, and I want to just stipulate these now, all right? Systemic racism is a thing. This is not a conversation about whether or not it exists and should we care about it and should we believe in it. It is an historic fact that has fundamentally divided people in America for hundreds of years. And there is no conversation about what to do today that we can have if we can't be serious and honest about what we did before that created this set of conditions, period. So we got to stipulate this or there's no point in having this conversation. The other thing that I think we have to stipulate is that money and power actually get in the way of progress. We tend to constantly say, well, what we need to do is harness money and power to make change. Honestly, most of the time, money and power gets in the way of progress. That's how we wound up with systemic racism in the first place. So we have to have an open conversation about the roles that money and power play in equity. And today's conversation and the lessons that I hope to bring forward to you are focused specifically on that dynamic of money and power. So good? So far, so good? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I want to just give you a little bit of context about how I come into this conversation. I am not a researcher by practice. I am not a professor by my background in history. I don't even have a PhD. All right? I came out of the world of practice and encountered money and power from a lot of different professions. I got my start in microlending in Chicago. I was the only white woman in an organization of Black and Latina employees that worked on microlending for Black and Latina women in Chicago. That's where I got my start. From there, I went to Fortune 100 Management Consulting, which was a huge change, but gave me an opportunity to look at money, power, and equity from the perspective of business. From there, I actually ran a research center that looked at nonprofit organizations and philanthropy at Harvard, so it took a deep dive in institutions and how they affect outcomes, how governance affects those outcomes, who's in those organizations affects those outcomes. From there, I became the first woman to run Catholic Charities for the Archdiocese of Boston, which was a $40 million anti-poverty agency serving 150,000 people in the eastern half of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. 100-year-old institution doing long-term anti-poverty work. And after that, I went to a startup called Boston Rising, which was an operating foundation looking to find some really innovative ways to try to break generational poverty in partnerships with historically Black neighborhoods in Boston, all right? Now, we did some pretty innovative things, I would argue. I would also tell you that we no longer exist, and I think those two things are partially related. I think there were a lot of reasons we no longer exist, but one of them was how hard we pushed the envelope. And I think that's important to acknowledge as well. So all those different places, and now coming to a School of Social Work, which has forced me to begin to make sense of all of that, is how I come into this conversation with you. And I just want you to know where that comes from. So I'm going to mostly focus on some innovations at Boston Rising and how leading up to those and the experience we had with those, plus that other background, led to the lessons and challenges that I'm hoping to discuss in the next few minutes. So far, so good? And does this seem in line with what you expected? Because if I'm like wildly off, somebody tell me now before I waste another 15 minutes of your time. We're good? Okay. So I want to start by talking about a few things that we attempted to do at Boston Rising to really flip the script on money and power and the narrative that we have about why people are poor. Oh, I want to go back. There's one more thing I think we need to stipulate. There is this concept in research called intersectionality. It originally came up in concepts of gender and race. Here's the thing. The intersection between your racial identity, your socioeconomic status, and where you live is also an absolute thing. And it has a compounding effect that changes outcomes by the fact that those three things intersect with each other, right? So each one of those, your racial identity, your socioeconomic status, and where you live, each can affect outcomes. But when you put the three together, they have compounding effects that are a direct result of the interaction of those three things. That is over and above what any one of them would have on their own, all right? Now, what's important to hold in tension with that is while that's true, at some other level, the only difference between a low-income family and a high-income family is money. And it's important to keep those two things in tension as we think about going forward. All right, so we tried to do some different things to flip the script and change the power dynamic. And I just want to talk to you very quickly about a couple of things we did. One of the first things that we did was rising class stories. We curated stories across race, gender, age, socioeconomic status of people's own stories of how they rose. And we did about 150 of these stories and found everybody had essentially the same story. When I was growing up, there were some things I wanted. In order to be able to get there, there were some other people who had to believe in me. Once those people believed in me, I believed in myself. I began to take steps forward. I either encountered financial challenges or I encountered personal challenges. Other people believed in me, helped carry that forward. That is my story of rising, right? It was really important to curate these stories and demonstrate that we are all part of a class we called the rising class. We are all actually part of the same class, which is the rising class, with the same aspirations, the same narrative, the same thing we want for ourselves, our children, and our communities, right? I see this thing over here about nearly 500,000 children in the greater Atlanta region live in communities with low child well-being, and it says, want to change that? Well, you know who wants to change that? Their parents. Because everybody's parents want better for their kids than they had for themselves, want to be able to live out their dreams and aspirations in a community that supports them and makes them feel happy and allows them to express the love they have in their hearts. That's what everybody wants. And these stories were an important way to tell that, all right? So the second thing that we did was we decided to do a community data gathering initiative. But there was no way we were going to do it as a philanthropic organization with a white woman in charge, the way that that's traditionally done, right? You go into some big community meeting space, you sit on the dais, there's some microphones, people get a fixed amount of time, they get to tell you what you asked them to tell you. So we did three key things. One, we employed young people from the neighborhood to work with us. So we never went anywhere without a young person from the neighborhood with us. Two, we put ourselves on the street so that in every case, we were the ones who could be rejected, always. The power to accept or reject the invitation was always in the hands of the community member. Excuse me, sir, excuse me, ma'am, do you have time to talk to me? Would you be interested in talking to me? Any rejection that happened was going to happen to us, which was a really important dynamic and terrifying for people who came out with us, white people especially who came out with us, who are never in the position where they're the ones that get rejected, right? But it was a really important part of the dynamic. The third thing was we reframed the whole conversation about asking people to talk about quality. That's what the Q is about. Because one of the things that we have to change in our narrative is some bizarre belief that high-income communities and people are deserving of quality, and low-income communities and people get what they get and don't get upset. And beginning to change that dynamic and saying, excuse me, sir, excuse me, ma'am, we are trying to understand what you believe is quality in your neighborhood, is a completely different conversation. And then, of course, bringing that data back to the community, holding a public meeting where you say, we asked you these questions, thank you so much. Of the about 1,500 people we talked to during that time, 900 gave us time and talked to us. And I think so much of that was by changing the power dynamic in that conversation, all right? But framing it as a question about quality. Tell us what is quality in your neighborhood. What should we be supporting? Tell us what isn't quality in your neighborhood and what would you want to see us invest in to change that is a really important central framing. These parents know what is quality and not quality, right? We don't get to decide that, right? You know, I know what's quality and not quality for my kids, and I damn well expect to be asked. So that was another key thing that we did. All right. The next one was, and in part I think this is what broke us in the end, we took $250,000 and completely turned it over to the community. We went out into the community and said, we would like to ask you to form a board, and we're going to turn $250,000 of philanthropy completely over to you in every way. If you would like some training and support in how to do governance, and they said, yes, please, so we provided some training and support in how to do governance, but then the Grove Hall Trust was formed. And from top to bottom, how are we going to give the money? Is it an endowment or not? How are we going to manage it? What are our giving priorities? What size gifts? Over what time? How are we going to measure success? Every single aspect of it was run by the community. We completely surrendered control of those resources. And it worked, and it terrified people on the donor side of the equation. I mean, I can't even, right? Terrified people on the donor side of the equation. But it led to really interesting things. The community said, you know what we actually need? We need $500, $600, $700 at a time to give to human beings. Not 501c3s, not local businesses, but people who have neighborhood improvement ideas and just don't have access to small amounts of capital to do them. So that's how the Grove Hall Trust chose to administer that money. It lasted for approximately 3 years using that approach and led to everything from neighborhood block parties to community engagement to small maker spaces, all the kinds of things that every other community in the world does when it has access to capital. And by the way, in our white middle class communities, we don't make them report. We don't say, I'm going to give you this tax credit, and now you got to tell me if you got the results I care about. So this is not a crazy thing to do. It just seems crazy when you do it with a low-income black community, right? But it's not a crazy thing to do. It's how we do things all the time. So, but I think it's part of what broke us. I think it was just one step, one bridge too far. The last thing we did, we were in a team meeting one time, and one of my colleagues said, why is it that when we talk about white people, we talk about innovation, and when we talk about black people, we talk about jobs? And that was a huge revelation, especially in a city like Boston that's all about the innovation economy. Well, the innovation economy is the white economy, and the jobs economy is the black economy, and the brown economy. So we set out to demonstrate that you could do a business plan competition and find innovators and entrepreneurs in a historically black neighborhood just like you could in the white innovation district in the Seaport, right? It was a really interesting thing because the device was actually to demonstrate that those entrepreneurs were there. What we got was, well, how many percentage of these businesses will succeed, right? The same percentage that succeed anywhere else, which is very few of them, right? But the idea was to demonstrate to the community that there were entire ecosystems of potential entrepreneurs and innovators who have ideas, but who are not being brought into business plan competitions, who are not being given that 12 weeks of support, aren't doing pitch, practices, et cetera. What happened as a result were two things that were incredibly important to us. First, for the first time in history, a 26-year-old black woman made the cover of the Boston Business Journal as an entrepreneur because she was one of the winners of our competition. And she was from Dorchester, which is a neighborhood that also doesn't make the cover of the Boston Business Journal. The second thing was that Mass Challenge, the big entrepreneurship track in Boston, developed what they called an urban business track for urban innovators. It's a step. I see the faces. It's a step, right? So we at least got there. And when Marty Walsh came on as our new mayor, he took a historically black neighborhood in Boston and said, this is now an innovation district. It was the first time that had ever happened in the city's history, right? So far, so good? How am I doing on time? Where are you? I'll just chat, so I need to know. How am I doing? How much time do I have left? Great, right on time. Is there anything I need to do to clarify this? Okay, now last, although Boston Rising no longer exists, the other thing that we did, which I think was really important, was that we single-handedly doubled the number of people of color in senior positions of philanthropy in the city of Boston with our hiring practices. And when the organization closed, all of those people went out into senior leadership positions. So this, for example, is Damon Cox, who went from Boston Rising to a senior program officer position at the Boston Foundation, the biggest community foundation in Boston, and 2 weeks ago became the head of social entrepreneurship for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, right? So in your hiring practices, you can also begin to develop a new pool of leaders who have a different lived reality and begin to then go out into marketplaces and bend and break all the stereotypes and rules as well. And that legacy, everything we did was a device for something else as well. It was the thing we were doing, giving $5,000 to an entrepreneur, and a device for something else, demonstrating that people of color in traditionally low-income neighborhoods are entrepreneurs too, and should get capital and resources too. So everything's got to play at multiple levels if you want to do the thing you're doing and change the system it's in at the same time. No more straightforward stuff. That's not smart enough. We got to play at multiple levels all the time. So if you're doing something and it's not also a device to change systems and structures, ask yourself, how could we do it differently so that it is? And then be prepared for the fact that you might fail at the thing it looks like it's doing, but achieve at beginning to disrupt systems. And have metrics that allow you want to talk about a double bottom line, that's a double bottom line. Have metrics that allow you to look at both of those things at the same time. What are we disrupting and what are we achieving? Because if we achieve without disrupting, we are squashing the quality and magnitude of the achievement we might otherwise get. Does that make sense? If we are achieving without disrupting, we are squashing the quality and the magnitude of achievement we might otherwise get. So far, so good? All right. So, Does that mean that this is without challenge? Oh my God, no. It's all challenge, all the time, all right? And the challenges are about money and power. So let's just talk about that for a minute, okay? It is just too much about the money, all right? White people in the room, rich people in the room, enfranchised people in the room, I am especially talking to you, okay? Money and return on money is the thing we know how to measure, A. B, we believe we have power because we're good with money, and so we think that's where our genius lies, and therefore we should continue to measure in that space, okay? That is a faulty way to look at deep disruptive systems change. It is a much more complex calculus of return, and we're going to get to that. And it also means loving the sharing of choice and control more than you love your money. And that's incredibly hard for anybody in the room. Now I'm talking to everybody in the room, all right? Loving the sharing of choice and control and power more than you love your money is hard for everybody. That's why it's like in the 10 Commandments, right? It's like, you know, burning bush hard. And I think that's important to keep in mind. All right, so 1, sharing at all is hard, all right? But sharing control is extremely difficult. Not only control of money, like the Grove Hall Trust. No, wait. So what are your metrics for the Grove Hall Trust? Ask them. What are your ask them, right? But also sharing who defines success. Philanthropy, if you think you're getting it about sharing choice and control with how we allocate resources, congratulations, that's awesome. The next step is sharing choice and control about what success is. And to the extent that philanthropies are still saying, please take our money and do exactly what we say, the way we say it, to get the metrics we value, I'm sorry, I get it. I've been on both sides, right? Run a philanthropy, been on both sides. But that disrespects people's power to self-determine. It disrespects the idea that the history of humanity progressing is by people making decisions for themselves to carry themselves forward. It pretends that the formula that developed and succeeded for the white middle class in America in the 20th century cannot be applied to anybody else. We have a new middle class coming in the 21st century. That new middle class doesn't look like the middle class from the 20th century, but they want the same things. And they're going to develop using the same kinds of investments and the same kinds of approaches. And that means letting people and communities define success and priorities for themselves. Right? Now, you can then hold them accountable for whether they achieve those. I'm not saying there's no accountability. There's plenty of accountability. But who defines what you're accountable to? That's the next stage in sharing. Does that make sense? I know. But this is where we have to go if we're really going to disrupt. All right? So sharing is hard. Patience and risk. Please hear me now. An investment only looks risky if the status quo is working for you. Let me just say that one more time. An investment only looks risky if the status quo works for you. If the status quo is not working for you, then you're going to try anything. And it's not actually that risky. It's just a new way to try things. So as you begin to think about risk in communities, risk in your organizational investments, risk in philanthropic investments or business spending, a good question to start with is, well, who is the status quo working for? And am I looking to maintain or disrupt that status quo? Because that now needs to be introduced into our risk calculus. So far, so good? Okay, and then patience, all right? We say we're patient. We celebrate the 3-year and 5-year and 10-year time horizon. All right, white people in America built structures that took generations, centuries, to create systems of oppression. Generations and centuries to create systems of oppression, right? Communities participated in those systems of oppression and developed themselves within those confines for generations and centuries. So we have to find ways to have short-term measures that show that we're headed in the right direction. Yes, absolutely. But long-term, true grit, generational level measures about how change is going to happen over time. And actually, that's actually not that hard. Our community institutions are around for 20 years, 50 years, 70 years, 100 years. They are. Many of your organizations that you represent have already been in the long play. We can begin to develop that long view. But it takes constant work, constant discussion, and what I'll say later is what we would call in the work that my colleague and I have done, persistent change perspective, which means complete impatience about what's happening today and complete patience about how long it's going to take to change it, and holding that tension over time. Yes? Okay. Lastly, ROI, return on investment, I'd like to replace it with ROH, return on humans, and develop a broader sense of what we want out of humanity for dollars spent and human effort expended, right? So investment needs to be broadened past dollars expended to social capital expended, human effort expended, community resources expended, so that we get a better understanding of what's going into change. And then we've got to broaden our understandings of return into metrics that are not as comfortable, that are more qualitative than quantitative, that are proxy measures for returns that are hard to demonstrate. But until we do that, we will limit ourselves to types of returns that cannot disrupt. Because they were returns that were developed in status quo systems in the first place. Now, there is nothing wrong with also asking about the financial performance of your money. There's nothing wrong with that. But understand that that's about your relationship with money, right? So in the nonprofit organization, in the philanthropy, in the business community, there's nothing wrong with that piece. We just can't stop there. We have to compare that to other forms of return and ask where that balance lies. And that's actually one of the places that I think academia over time can begin to help. What are those other measurement sets? What are some other qualitative measures? What are some ways, some indexes that we can begin to develop? That's a wonderful place for partnership between the geeks and wonks and the people on the ground. But we got to do that. We got to move to a much different sense of what ROI is, and I just like the disruption of calling it ROH, personally. Okay. How am I doing, Laura? How much time do I have left? 0? No. Okay, so can I just 1, 2? All right. Wait, come on. Okay, last point, all right? At the end of the day, okay, so I'm Catholic and it's Lent. Let me just say that right now, okay? But these are principles that were taught to me through my faith tradition but are secularized and really critical. At the end of the day, to achieve the kind of change and transformation where we build trust, we share power, and we begin to make real change at the intersection of race, place, and poverty, we have to practice solidarity and subsidiarity, all right? Solidarity is a sense that we are fundamentally connected. And when we rise together. And if someone in our community is not rising, we are all experiencing human and spiritual poverty as a result of that, right? There is financial poverty, and there is spiritual poverty. And when we are not in right relationship with each other, we are spiritually poor. And solidarity is the act of relentlessly pursuing right relationships. And subsidiarity is a fundamental concept that began out of faith traditions but has moved into the secular world that says, put resources as local and close to the problem as humanly possible, because that's where the lived wisdom is to make the change. So if you remember nothing else from what I said this morning, if you just try to achieve solidarity and subsidiarity in your work, it will be towards goodness and towards changing power structures and earning trust to create communities that move forward. All right, I'm totally out of time. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. This is the type of intellectual stimulation this city needs so desperately. this type of thinking, this type of challenge. And thank you for your honesty. And we're going to have a hell of a conversation right after this. I'm excited. I was like, oh my God, keep going. That's so dope. Oh my gosh, you're the best. So my name is Rohit Malhotra. I am from Atlanta. This is home for me. And I'm the founder and executive director of an organization called the Center for Civic Innovation. I'm actually excited to talk to you today. And we did not coordinate talking points, but you're going to hear a lot of overlap. That the story of Atlanta, just like it's always been throughout history, resonates around the country and around the world. And what I'm going to be able to tell you a little bit about today is what the Center for Civic Innovation has done, what it is, where we're going, and then some major challenges that I think we face in this sector, this way of thinking of how do we invest in social change? How do we invest moving forward? What could that look like? And I'm happy to share some of the examples that we've had in Atlanta. And so Atlanta in 2012, 2013, it was flooding the headlines. It was the comeback city. This is the city where, Boston, you better watch out. We're coming for you, right? This is everybody watch out. We are on an economic rise. Our GDP is growing. We are strong again. We are resilient. The Phoenix made a comeback. But in those same years, we also faced another statistic, which was that Atlanta was named the most unequal city in the United States. There was a 96% chance if you were born poor in Atlanta, you were going to die poor in Atlanta. We became suddenly a tale of two cities. And this was something that we had to figure out, how do you address that? Because when you have a gap like that, it means something. And what it means is that we have a gap not just in numbers and income. We have a gap in justice. We have a gap in opportunity. And we have a gap in trust. And trust is what fuels us. It's what brings us together. It's what makes all this work matter. And less than 20% of people trust their city. And when we started to think about this work, we said, so what do you do when you face a gap like that? And fundamentally, what we said was, we gotta have better conversations. They gotta be centered in data, but we gotta start talking about this. Why aren't we talking about this? And the second is that we gotta try something different. That's what Atlanta is built on. That's what our history is built on. And third, that this can't just happen in silos, that this has to be the rules that we play. We gotta actually make our public policy reflect who we are. And so in 2014, a bunch of us from a number of different industries, from whether you worked in government or you worked in hip hop or you worked in the entertainment sector, you worked in the nonprofit sector, we all got together and said, we're all seeing the same thing. And we got to have this conversation with more people. And on our opening night, we didn't know what the Center for Civic Innovation was going to be. We just knew that this conversation had to happen. And we had hundreds of people flood in that night in the pouring rain, which if you're from Atlanta, you know what that means. That means that it was a hell of an event, right? And it was the beginning of a really important conversation for us. And the Center for Civic Innovation has become a place whose mission it is to empower people to shape the future of this city. And we do that by investing in community-driven ideas that create systems-level change. Now, we couldn't use these words in 2012, 2013, 2014. People were like, what are you talking about? Investing in communities? We already do that. We invest a lot in communities. And I want to give you a little bit of insight into what our process is. And I've never really shared this publicly, so this is actually just as important for me as I hope it is for you. And the way we do our work is we start with data. That seems weird, but we start with data because we want to get the facts straight. But that data has to be surrounded with what is the human story? What are people actually going through on a day-to-day basis? And these types of conversations, whether they happen in a big forum setting, whether they happen through exercises that people can do on the ground, whether they happen through one-on-one conversations with people who are running for office or who are elected for office, or whether they happen because you're on the street dressed up like a polar bear just telling people to vote, that's me. Sorry, Mom. That these conversations are exactly what give us the opportunity to find interventions to do something. That you don't find those interventions and new ideas just out of thin air, that they're based in really good information. And once you get good information, we think there is an opportunity to invest in what we call civic entrepreneurs. Now, a civic entrepreneur is not like a regular entrepreneur and not even like a social entrepreneur. Your everyday entrepreneur, it may be a pizza shop owner, maybe a small business owner that has a bottom line. I got to make these financial returns and got to make sure my business survives. A social entrepreneur says, well, I not only want to make money, but I want to do something good with the money that I make. That if I sell a shoe, I want to give a shoe away. But these are still designed for the end game of growing and optimally participating in the market economy to earn as much profit as possible. But a civic entrepreneur also focuses on policy outcomes. And in fact, a civic entrepreneur is designed to go out of business because they are created to actually solve the problem. That once the problem is actually solved, their solution is adopted as the status quo. And these civic entrepreneurs, they don't put that on their business card. I went to school in Boston, I went to spend some time in New York and in DC, and you have people who come up to you and say, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a social entrepreneur. I'm like, so what are you working on? I'm working on that. But in Atlanta, social entrepreneurship and civic entrepreneurship is not an academic exercise. These are farmers who are bringing fresh, affordable foods to communities that have not had it in a state that is plentiful with food. These are yoga instructors that are working with police officers and teachers and communities that have faced high amounts of trauma and actually reducing their stress, reducing their health barriers so that they can do the job better. This is a hip-hop organization that brings people together to increase their vocabulary and increase test scores of young kids who are not able to have a conversation with a guidance counselor. But they can have it in a circle of people when they spit rhymes back and forth in collaboration with one another. It's also artists, people who activate spaces, increase the value of public spaces in a way that makes us feel more connected to it, but also increases the value of every single thing around it. Or teachers who every single day in the classroom are finding new ways to make educational outcomes better for their students. These are civic entrepreneurs, and this work is about public policy. We want to make sure that at the end of the day that growing these businesses is not the end game. The end game is to actually influence outcomes, to make our city adopt these interventions as our status quo. And so this work is tough. And we have been doing this for 3.5 years. That was me again, by the way. I dressed up as the Bill from Schoolhouse Rock, ran around. I was like, y'all, we have to vote. This is the second time I have to do this. This is ridiculous. Out of costume ideas. So we're 3.5 years into this thing, right? And I want to give you some data that this particular conversation allowed me to dive into. Because I knew I was going to be paired up with an academic, and I got to come with some numbers, right? But we've been at this for 3.5 years, and we've grown this into a team of 7 people who come to this work for very different places in very different ways. And we've had over 300 of those conversations over the past 2.5 years right here in the city of Atlanta. We've engaged tens of thousands of folks who have come through on the south side of downtown where people said no one will ever go there unless they get a ticket. And they were there in in-depth conversations. We started a program called Vote ATL to say, let's actually make sure people are informed when they come to these conversations. And over the past 2.5 years, we've actually supported 69 civic entrepreneurs. And that number is sexy. And there is a these are farmers, these are teachers, these are doctors, these are people on the ground doing the work every single day. And of those 69 folks, 65% of them are entrepreneurs of color, and 62% are female. We look like Atlanta. This program, in the way that we identify folks, the way that we communicate with people, similar to the conversations that my colleague was talking about, we don't go into a neighborhood and say, tell us everything that's going wrong here. We're saying, what's going right? Who's doing the work? And how do we find creative ways to support them? And we particularly pay attention to entrepreneurs that we have just forgotten about, because civic entrepreneurs don't call themselves that. And particularly, women entrepreneurs are at have a 3 times harder time to get social capital in an industry where they're 70% of the workforce. And so we've partnered up with folks like United Way and others across town, Sarah Blakely, to actually bring capital to folks. And in our women cohorts, we found that they actually grow at a 30% faster rate as an enterprise than their male counterparts. This is a statistic I'm really proud of, is that we were able to get 1.5 million in new capital committed to be distributed to these types of entrepreneurs. And we've done it in a variety of different ways. Sometimes we've had to rob Peter to pay Paul. We've done the grant application on behalf of someone else to get the capital to come in. But these are non-traditional investors. These are people who are saying, I want my money not just to go to a community foundation, not just to follow the same rules. I want to do this work just a little bit differently. And at the end of the day, this didn't live and die with just the enterprises themselves. We actually fought to make sure that public policy reflects and understands and captures the work that they do. So what did we learn? This is hard and weird work. And at the end of the day, it starts with trust. I grew up with 2 heroes in my life. They were both characters in my dad's stories, and if you have immigrant parents, you know that immigrant dads only have 2 stories, and they just tell them over and over and over again. And those heroes were Jimmy Carter and my grandfather. And because of the fascinating details of these individuals' lives, I fell in love with government and with community. 2 things that could not feel like greater opposites today. And I do this work because of that love, that how do you build trust again? In the same way that Jimmy Carter built it, by leaving his post in the Navy to save his family farm, saying that family, more than anything, is important. It's what drove my immigrant father to start his own business. I thought he was his hero because they both have accents that no one can understand, but instead, my dad found love in the story of Jimmy Carter, the man, not necessarily the president. And my grandfather, who went from door to door to door in Punjab, inside of India, after the partition, to make sure that people had eaten. And if they hadn't in his village, he made sure that food was hand-delivered to the homes that had not had food that day. And he taught me that the value and the wealth of a community is so much bigger than one's individual self. It's not monitored by capital, it's monitored by the relationships and trust that exist within those communities. And that's what fuels the work. That's what gets me excited. But there are 10 major things that we have learned that I want to share with you all through our work that we think is necessary to address to move this conversation forward. And the first is that information on what actually works is currently inaccessible, unusable, and unreliable. This fake news thing is funny, but it's not. Because we have lied to people with information time and time and time again throughout history, and that is every media channel, that is every nonprofit that has fudged its numbers, that is every investor that has said their work is actually working in a way that it wasn't. These numbers drive us to build things on information that does not reflect the actual work. Our data systems are broken. And we have to have better information on what's happening and what's not happening, because information is a right. The second thing is that data is not enough. That people are not data points. They are wrapped up in cultures and traditions and reasons for why they do things that we can only understand by seeing them. We can't just tweet at people. We got to make sure that we see them face to face when the cameras are off, because that's where true trust begins to build. Distrust of government is a crisis. It is at all-time lows, but the way it gets solved is through honesty. One of the most popular people in mayors in US history, I would argue, is Mayor Menino of Boston, who was more popular than kittens, according to one study, and kittens are pretty damn popular. It literally went Mayor Menino, Boston Red Sox, kittens. So Boston's weird, I don't know. But Mayor Menino, Larry Summers, presidential economist, made a speech about Mayor Menino. He said, Mayor Menino's really weird. We would go to schoolyards and he would point out all the tiles that were missing, all the things that are, the fences that had holes in them. And he goes, well, I guess that makes sense because people's ultimate reasoning for trusting government to do the big things depends on government's ability to do the small things. But I don't think that's why people loved Mayor Menino. I think they loved Mayor Menino because he noticed that there was something missing in the first place, that he was at the schoolyard, that he didn't just talk from the bully pulpit and take the word bully more seriously than the word pulpit. We have to start being honest with one another again. But this isn't just the responsibility of institutions. We got to show up. People have to show up. In a city that prides itself on the civil rights movement, on the Voter Rights Act, our last election this past year was decided by 759 votes. In 2009, the previous mayor was decided by 714 votes. That's smaller than most Indian weddings. And so anytime someone says, your vote doesn't matter, no one's gonna, it doesn't matter for me to show up, they're wrong. And our outcomes are showing that. But in order for people to want to show up, they have to feel that they are at the center of decision making. And the best way for me to explain this is through my dating life. So when I was a student at Emory, I used to take all of my I took one date to this noodle joint. It was right down the street over here. And I used to take her there, and you would make your own stir fry, right? So you put your own rice, noodles, put your own vegetables, whatever you got, right? And by the end of it, they cook it for you, they bring it out to you, and you eat what you made. But I didn't take her there because the food was amazing. I took her there because she would never say it was bad. Why? Because she made it. And nobody wants to say the food that they made doesn't taste good. And this is no different than our noodles of politics. Because when you engage people in the process of making something, when it's done, they will see the good in it and fight for it before they see the bad. In this work, we must invest in capital, not rainbows, butterflies, feelings, donations. We have to view this as a vital part of our economy. Sure, money isn't everything, but money is currently our dictator of value. And when the way we are distributing capital to people is less an indicator of their value, but more of how we value them. And until we start putting capital in a way that reflects our value system, problem solving will always be an afterthought. It will always be an externality. And when we invest that capital, the greatest asset is the entrepreneur. And we do not position her to take care of herself. Self-care is a problem in this space. Not everybody is an entrepreneur. And sometimes when we invest capital into people, we want them to become overnight successes. But we don't realize that we've already started them 10 steps before the race even started. We're trying to get them caught up in 6 months. Go, come on, where's my return? What's your problem statement? Can you fill out this sheet? One of the greatest investments we make is we never make that investment directly into an organization. We make it directly into the entrepreneur. because they are an organization's greatest asset. And we today do not value civic work. We don't. We take it for granted. Because the first thing to get cut when it comes to recession times, when it comes to ways to think about our economy, the first thing to get cut are social programs. And it's not done on data, it's done on feeling and emotion. I already made a promise to that person. I gotta keep funding that. And today, GDP is an incomplete representation of our economic strength. It should not be okay for a city like Atlanta to be able to be called a booming city, a booming economy with the highest income inequality gap in the United States. It shows us that GDP is an inaccurate representation of what is actually happening. That the representation of goods and services is moving faster than our ability to actually capture our values again. And public policy is that reflection of our values. So I end with why this work matters, and why it matters to me, and why I hope it matters to you, and that is that in one of my favorite books, spoiler alert, if you haven't read The Giving Tree, it's the best book ever. It is the West Wing of the 1900s, or whatever, Shel Silverstein wrote it. The Giving Tree is a story about a young boy whose greatest memories, greatest moments, greatest things in his life happen because of a tree. And he gets everything. When he has his first friends, it happens around a tree. When he finds love, it's with the tree. It's not with the tree, but it's around the tree. When he builds his first home, he gets those branches from the tree. When he needs a transportation, he gets it from the tree. And by the end of the book, he's sitting on a stump because the tree has given absolutely everything it could to this boy. That is my story with this city. It's given me everything. It's given me my friends, it's given me my family, it's what I fight for, it's why I'm angry about it, but I love it. It's my city. And it's where I found my best friends, it's where I found my colleagues, it's where I've started this company, it's where my parents paid for me to make the basketball team. It's my city. And I don't want to wait for it to be a stump before I give back to it. And it's our responsibility to have these conversations in an authentic way, in a way that matters, and in a way that actually moves the needle forward. Because I don't want this to be another statistic for us again. We have to stop this trend. And my dad always said that if my grandfather and Jimmy Carter ever met one another, they would be the best of friends. And while my grandfather has passed, I know that no matter where Jimmy Carter goes, and he will live forever apparently, no matter where he goes and when he leaves us, he will have a friend in my grandfather. Because when a community organizer and a government leader are honest and willing to have a conversation in a productive way, even those two can be the best of friends. Thank you for your time.
Let's give Rohit and Tiziana another round of applause. They are two incredibly dynamic speakers. Wow, that was amazing. We are going to take the next 10 to 12 minutes for conversations at your tables. We encourage you to talk freely amongst yourselves about what you've heard this morning about power and trust and race in your work. And then we will have about 25 minutes to have a conversation with Rohit and Tiziana. They're going to join each other on the stage and just hear from you and respond to you. And so I think our timing is working out. So we obviously could have listened to just one of them for our entire time together. And so it might have seemed like we were crunching their time, but we wanted to have an opportunity for you all to have a brief conversation with each other and then provide have an opportunity to have a dialogue with them. So I'm going to stop talking. And so please talk amongst yourselves and then we'll pass the mic and have them provide feedback. Thank you.
So I wanted to actually start with this. You opened up your comments around the difference between Boston and Atlanta. And aside from, Boston being the Atlanta of the North. What are those major differences? Just to give us some context about the different cities that you think are really important within.
Yeah, so one thing I think we don't think about a lot. So Boston, the city of Boston is 600,000 people. So Boston thinks it's a really big city, and it's actually really not. It's really a mid-size American city.
Yeah.
I think that there are things that are uniquely possible in a mid-size American city that has a certain set of building blocks, right? One or two key corporate partners, one or two large philanthropies, a relatively historic and strong civic infrastructure of community engagement, et cetera. I think Atlanta has both the benefits and the challenges of having and trying to do that on a much bigger scale. And in some ways, it allows you to accelerate change over time. But in other ways, the larger the city, the harder it is to get traction across neighborhoods and communities. So I think that's just a tension and a balance.
Yep.
I also think that Boston has its own unique immigrant story.
Yep.
That is sort of a portal into America. It is a complicated story of sort of first British immigration, and then white Irish immigration, and white Italian immigration, and then part of the Great Migration from south to north, and then increasingly Latino migration. And so Boston has had an arc over its history of lots of different communities coming forward, but everybody coming forward at the bottom of the pile first.
Yeah.
And that is, if you read Isabel Wilkerson's Warmth of Other Suns, she does a really, really good job of laying out how whoever the latest kid on the block is forced to start at the bottom by everyone else who wants to protect however far they've come. And I think Boston has a particular story of that. My guess is Atlanta has its own version of that story.
Yeah.
But because I don't live here, it's not one that I know.
Yeah, sure. And I don't have prepared questions, so I just figured we'd make this back and forth. But
yeah.
I think you talking about the immigrant journey of folks is so interesting. It's something it's a tension that I think exists in a city like Atlanta, because you have almost 60% African American population, and oftentimes the stories of immigrants and the stories of Black families get conflated. But I think it's a very difficult conversation. That yes, there are streams of similarity, right? To certain things that from a family perspective that you go through, but the Black experience in America is different than the immigrant experience in America. Do you find that plays out in Boston as well, or is that a...
Absolutely. So in Boston, for example, the first community that we worked in with Boston Rising was a neighborhood called Grove Hall.
Yeah.
And we specifically did that because that community was about 86% African American specifically, and had a history in the 20th century of being the seat of African American activism in the city of Boston. Right? Now, what's interesting is Grove Hall is beginning to change in its demographics. So you're seeing growing Dominican communities, Puerto Rican communities in particular. But there is a fundamental different, and again, white, I get it. There is a fundamentally different experience for Black Americans than any other race or ethnicity based on our history of slavery.
Yeah.
And if we can't acknowledge that and recognize that it creates a unique formation, and we just say every experience of a person of color is the same. I mean, you're the one that said people come from their own cultures, they come from their own traditions.
Yeah.
They've been disenfranchised in very specific ways. I think over time there are interesting opportunities for solidarity there. I think it's really important to recognize the way that Mexican Americans and Mexican immigrants are being particularly demonized today. Right, that creates opportunities for solidarity with other populations who historically were demonized for the way they came into the country. So it's not that there aren't opportunities for solidarity there, but just as you said, trust begins with honesty.
Yeah.
The African American experience in the United States is fundamentally different because of slavery, period.
Yeah.
And we got to be able to acknowledge that.
So how do we break through these conversations, right? This is honestly, I think the best group doing is Queer Eye on Netflix. It's doing a pretty interesting job of...
The new one or the old one?
Definitely the new one. I may or may not have cried during every episode, but it's based in Atlanta. And I think that I don't know. I think everyone's searching for a new way to have this conversation. I think it's weird for when you're talking about race, when a white person has a ton of perspective on it, and that's just weird, right? I think, and people are trying to figure that out, but there are a lot of white people who have dedicated their life to these types of conversations and this type of work that are like, I have something to contribute here, and there's this discomfort of how should those conversations go, and how do we even just get started? I heard a really interesting quote this past week where someone said, someone who's really passionate about these issues just not coming to the forefront was like, you know what, I don't need any more allies. I don't need any more allies. I need accomplices. Mm-hmm. Like, I need to know that you're down to like get in the nitty gritty with me. Like, that when this thing gets wrong, like, we're going down together, right? Thank you for your allyship and your march, but I need accomplices. Like, do you think white individuals who care about these issues are ready or have already been accomplices, or are we still in the ally phase?
Well, I think, so a couple of things. One, I want to mark, there is a fascinating piece in The Atlantic. Now, I get that that's how liberals talk to each other.
Yeah,
I get that.
It's like, cool, we should be Facebook friends because you're all I hear. That's great.
But there is a fascinating piece in The Atlantic right now by Michael Gershon, who is comes out of the white evangelical tradition, historically a Republican, exploring the history of white evangelicalism in the history of the formation of the United States to today and the complexities of that. And I think it's a particularly important contribution to the dynamic of white people in America today and that experience and what's happening there. So that's one thing.
Yep.
The next thing is everybody has a lived truth.
Yep.
And we all have to be allies for each other's lived truths and acknowledge each other's lived truths. That's different than each other's biases.
Yep.
We have lived biases and we have lived truths. But I think our invitation is to recognize and acknowledge and be companions in each other's lived truths. I also think that where we come down, I struggle with allies, accomplices, I really do. For two reasons. One, I think we are facing a time now where the whole strategy is to pit everybody against each other.
Right.
Right? And so everybody's got to go out and march for their thing, because this is what we always do. We always pit the marginalized, the powerless, or those who are perceived to be losing power against each other in a giant circling of the wagons. And I think that's something we've got to be very careful to avoid now, which means there are also white low-income families who are being completely disenfranchised from this economy. Just as you say, that's why GDP is no longer a good measure of an effective economy. Let's not circle all those wagons.
That's right.
Let's talk about a healthier economy. Let's talk about ending everyone's spiritual poverty. Yep. Let's talk about creating right relationships. But then let's also acknowledge that everybody's experience is not is not equally disadvantaged.
Yep.
Does not have the same history of systemic oppression. Right? So everybody's got a real lived experience today, and there's room to acknowledge the disproportionality of that experience over time and find ways to come together. I don't know if that, does that make any sense?
No, it makes sense, right? I think like we got to start somewhere, right? And I think that fundamentally we have to start with some facts and some truths, and that's why I loved how you started this conversation in general. And I think a lot of this divide that you've been talking about, it comes from politics, right? It comes from the game of politics.
It's the game of winners and losers.
Yeah, totally. Capitalism, and we could be socialists together if you'd like to. But I think I'm worried about politics, right? Because I came from the Obama world, an organizer by trade. It's what I love and what I fight for. And I'll tell you, like this past election, and I'd love to hear your experiences from Boston around your election cycles. I was able to see.
I live in Massachusetts.
Some of it. I know you live in Yeah, but y'all elected Scott Brown, right? That was a real thing. When Ted Kennedy died, Scott Brown beat out Martha Coakley as a sitting, Democratic state. You got a Republican who actually had conversations with people and knew that the Red Sox play in Boston, and that was a very, very contentious election that actually flopped the outcome of healthcare, right? And I think in Atlanta, we want to be blue, right? Consciously, we talk about ourselves as a city of blue in a sea of red, right? And and this isn't about Democrat or Republican, but I feel like at a local level, we are getting away with progressive policies by using trickle-down economics. And it is, if you talk to me with the progressive words, but you treat me, with the conservative economics.
Well, that's the entire condemnation of the current Democratic Party.
But that's what I'm worried about, right? I think politics at this point, I've watched in Atlanta, we had 13 candidates for mayor. And all 13 of those candidates were fighting with each other on things that they all fundamentally agreed about. And by the end of it, it came down to we had a white candidate and a black candidate. That's all anybody knew. We had a white candidate and we had a black candidate. And one was labeled Hillary and one was labeled Trump, or one was labeled Obama and one was labeled Trump, right? Which side are you going to choose? And why has our politics become so divisive? And is the political party system dying in Boston? Because it was alive and well in this last election in a nonpartisan race. And so I'm worried about the systems that are actually set up to divide us playing an active part in systems that are supposed to be nonpartisan and non-divisional.
Yeah, well, so we have a, yeah. There you go, you're on.
Okay, just because I'm paying attention to the time here, and I wanted to see if there were any responses or if there was anything from the audience that we wanted to share, just because we only have about 10 minutes or so, and I know you all had some conversations at your tables, and so if we can shift just for a minute in our last 10 minutes or so, if there were comments that anyone wanted to share or questions that you wanted to pose to Tiziana and Rohit. I'm sorry to interrupt, but if we have the microphones, if there were anything on race or poverty or power and trust that anyone wanted to comment or share, I would love to hear, or we would love to hear any comments that you have. Yes.
Well, I love both of you. I know you, I don't know you, but I love both of you.
Hi.
I was fascinated by you sharing the story about going into the community and how the program worked, but was ultimately shut down. And my question to you, I was really interested in learning a little bit more about that, but also curious to learn more about the people who had an experience where their reality shifted. You know, they had something very successful, it sounded like, and then this organization or whatever it was shut it down.
Yeah.
So what happens to the people who had such a positive experience? Where do they go when that support is taken away?
So I appreciate that question, and there are two things that I want to emphasize there. Because the most painful part of that story for me is that your going in position should be first do no harm. And when you ask people to trust you and then you fail them in the end, which shutting down is failing them, you do harm. And there were two ways that we did harm, I think, with that shutdown in particular that trouble me to this day. The first was that we built a team of largely African-American, Latino, and African-Caribbean employees. That was our team, probably about 75 to 80% of our team. And in order to build credibility, there is no question that when those team members came to Boston Rising, they were lending us their social and political capital in their communities, right? And they spent that social and political capital that their hard-earned lives developed for this institution that then burned it by closing down, which then left those team members vulnerable in a new way in their communities, in their social circles, in their political circles, in their neighborhoods, for having vouched for something that didn't follow through. And that does harm, and that has got to be named. That is the risk of taking those kinds of steps. The other thing is we went into an historically black neighborhood that had good reason to not trust white infrastructure and power, right? Look at 1974 busing Boston, the book Common Ground. We said, we're gonna earn your trust, and we did. We worked really hard, 2 years of being present, right? You wanna talk about having a longer time horizon. 2 years of just being present, right? Please, this is different, trust us. And then in the end, when the white lead donor pulled his money out and went in another direction, what does that tell the community? about, right, this time you should trust us, right? So I think it's really, really important to acknowledge that when you do take real risk, you do the risk of doing real harm, and you have to own, and I own that harm, as well as the innovations that came from trying to do that work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So what are the lessons learned, and what would you do differently now if you were going to start this organization over? Just real quickly.
Yeah, if I could pick one lesson, I worked incredibly hard to steward a different way in the community. I failed to understand that I was going to have to work as hard to steward the fears and concerns of people who were having their status quo broken in order to bring it along. Does that make sense? And that is the first thing I would do differently.
So I appreciate both of the presentations, and I wish there'd been time for a third presentation about power and trust at the intersection of race, place, and poverty. I'm staring right in front of me at the map of advantage and disadvantage in the city. And the two presentations, which I thought were powerful, in that map, focused on the power that resides in the orange and the red places. The story that I hope United Way will spend another forum focusing on is the power that produced the systematic inequities that created that map, because those were intentional policy decisions over decades that continue today. And in the other communities I work in, I know that trust will not happen until the real stories about systematic structural racism in communities is struggled with together, acknowledged in honesty, recognized for the ways that it continues today, and then the people in those conversations recognize their own institutional power as well as their personal power to be change agents.
So for example, Social Security, when it was formed, carved out domestic workers and excluded them from being able to receive Social Security. And domestic workers were overwhelmingly people of color in the United States. And Social Security said that's the category of worker that will not get Social Security.
But also, I think organizations like the United Way, like other organizations, have to hold these systematic structures. They have the power to hold power accountable. Now, whether they exercise that power is different, right? And that's what I think our politics in a city like Atlanta play a significant role in how these conversations actually play out. We are a city that uses the Black narrative and the struggle of people when it is election time. But when it is not election time, then those narratives die. And those narratives now become just a conversation of convenience or on maps or left up to the nonprofits to figure out. But when are we going to see nonprofit leaders that have been institutional players for decades who have the ability to call directly to City Hall, call directly to the state and say, not on our watch. Absolutely not. We will not take a single penny from you again if you continue to invest capital into the same structures we're fighting. It's like we don't really want to go out of business. Okay, yeah.
Yes, this is a great forum. This is my first time, and I have been in the nonprofit sector for we're going on our 4th year. One of the things that I appreciate the conversation is on race, because being African American female, I do find it difficult to navigate through trying to get resources through large corporations, small corporations, or to be identified within certain organizations here in Atlanta. I am from Atlanta, born and raised, grew up in the south side of Atlanta. I've gone to public schools here. And so I remember a time where there were small sectors who would come into our school system to talk about various things. And those things no longer really exist. So as a small organization, I think my question would be to you is how do we have this conversation, because even at this table we had a small conversation about race, and there's still the elephant in the room. So even in a large forum like this, people are sitting at their individual tables with their mostly the same corporate organizations that they came with. So in this setting, how do we navigate and branch out to really become a part of the solution to the problem of poverty in the city of Atlanta, to maybe start the conversation here to be a model or a mold, a cycle that can take it to other states and little cities. So my question would just be, how do a small player in the city of Atlanta, who's doing the work on the ground every day, we hear the conversations, we see the need of the community, not just with our homeless community. There are people who are working, who are living in shelters. There are youth, LGBT youth have been shunned out of their homes and they don't have anywhere to go. We closed down one of the largest shelters in Atlanta. It was a place where there was no questions asked. You could come in, you didn't have an ID, but you could lay your head down somewhere in Atlanta. We have other shelters here in Atlanta that don't have enough beds to house these people. So even just driving this morning, I saw little pockets of people sleeping in storefronts and churches. And so we have to address the issue, because this is a society that's overlooked and forgotten. So how do they get back into society when we don't offer enough places or social services to help them to do this?
So this reminds me also of a question that got asked at the table that I was sitting at about if you're gonna favor innovation and social change, what happens to the safety net, right? And is that a maintaining of the status quo, or are those necessary sort of services? And I think the answer, so when I ran Catholic Charities, everybody was into social change. We had a big basic needs program, and I used to say, listen, I absolutely believe in teaching a man to fish, but before fishing lessons start, can he eat? Because he's hungry. Right? And I think we have to recognize that continuum and really, really ask for different metrics from our small grassroots organizations who are serving deeply disenfranchised populations, where efficiency and effectiveness are going to drive them out of business, because it's not the model for those populations, right? And one way to think about bridging that gap is to begin to use Yelp style and participatory style evaluations, right? So what happens when you want to keep a food pantry alive, and one of the ways that you do it is that you ask the people who go to the food pantry what their experience is like at the food pantry. If you ask young people who are in shelter what their experience is like in the shelter, and you begin to use that as the way you evaluate whether these small programs continue to live. You're beginning once again to do the thing that you need to do right in the moment, but take a systems change look by saying that the people who matter in determining whether this thing should stay open is the people who are consuming the services. And that moves us out of, as somebody at my table said, this efficiency and effectiveness model and into a different power dynamic while making sure that these fundamental basic needs get met.
I think that in addition to that, you have to value your work. Truth is that a number of folks, they always say, I hope I can get someone to value me, right? But you have to value your work. What is the value of the work that you're doing in actual economic numbers? Because the amount of money that we spend on those inefficiencies and ineffectiveness, let's turn that around and call that a return on investment. The effectiveness of your work, the work that you do on a day-to-day basis, needs to be measured for the value that it actually provides, not the value that it's perceived to provide. So if you are doing work, do it entrepreneurially. You don't have to be an entrepreneur, but do it entrepreneurially. No entrepreneur walks into a room and says, well, my product, it's all right. Like, I think it's okay, and I hope we can have this conversation, and I'm happy to fill out your paperwork to tell you if my product's all right. They go, no, this is the best thing. This is what we're doing. And even if we fail, we're going to pick it back up and figure it out. And in addition to calling yourself an entrepreneur, politics matters. I will not stop talking about that in these spaces, because for every year that I've been involved in these spaces, we take politics out of the equation and we say, well, there's nothing we can do about that. And we have to just figure it out by ourselves. Absolutely not.
No.
Public policy is the driver of our work. If we let the rules that dictate our day-to-day not reflect what we are actually doing and what we value, then you better believe that we're going to get taken advantage of in that way. 70% of people did not vote in the city of Atlanta. 70% of people did not show up to the polls. Why? We have to figure out, was it structural? Somewhat. Was it apathy? Maybe. But what have we done to make people feel like their voice just absolutely doesn't matter anymore? And we have to hold people who are making decisions accountable for the decisions that they're responsible for. But do not take politics out of our sector. I'd rather you lose your 501c3 and pay a little bit of tax so you can get your voice back. And let's fight.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Tim Packenham. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the United Way of Greater Atlanta, and it's my sad duty to close things out. First, I want to thank everyone who's attending and who has been attending the InForum series. We appreciate you. We need you for all the reasons that have been articulated. The community needs you. We're building a community within InForum, and I'd like you all to give yourselves a hand for participating and caring. I also need to thank our extraordinary speakers, Tiziana and Rohit. Fantastic, superb. We very much appreciate your being here and your obvious passion and your beautiful articulation of the challenges that we all face together. A big hand. You know, at the United Way of Atlanta, we have the conversations that Rohit and Tiziana have had with us today. It's just that we're not nearly as cool as they are when we have them. We all need to go to presentation school, I think. But you guys said a whole bunch of things that resonate with the United Way and with our work. But two things that, at least from my standpoint as COO, that I want to sort of try to emphasize and to help convince you guys that what you're doing in your collaborations with us really matters. One is that it is very clear to us that, and we're working very hard to try to crack the code on translating community investment, whether it's financial or volunteer, organizational efforts, collaborative efforts, into the return on humans. That is not an easy thing to do. We're working very hard to try to do that so that we can bridge the investor community side of our community with the provider side of our community, with the education side of our community, with all the partners who need to come together so that the 500,000 children in this city who need help to succeed in life can get the supports they need when they need them. So thank you. Kudos for that very much. The other thing is that I think that what the United Way of Greater Atlanta is about substantially today is about being disruptive, right? It is absolutely clear that we're not going to meet these challenges using the same habits, the same patterns, the same avenues, the same conversations that we've used for the 35 years that I've been in Atlanta. When you disrupt, you often release energy. You release positive energy that can be channeled, if you're smart about it, in the right ways. Since the Great Recession ended, the economic output of Metro Atlanta has increased 30%. Yet the number of children who face material barriers to their success every day continues to increase at an alarming rate. You can fill the Mercedes-Benz Stadium 7 times with children who are under 18 who got up this morning and were either hungry or facing a medical issue or were behind in their studies, who were facing substance abuse problems at home, any of the long litany of social ills that I could go on about. This is a scourge on Atlanta, right? It's all about these kinds of gatherings, this kind of energy, these kinds of collaborations that we can help address this problem, and Tiziana and Rohit articulated it very, very well. So we got a bit of housekeeping to do. We're going to try something. In the spirit of continuing to grow our InForum partnership, we're going to ask you to enter into this system information about upcoming events. So if you can go to menti, menti.com, and enter the code 312156. That's menti.com and 312156. If you write in your name of your organization, the event name and the date, we're going to gather up this information. I know that the time pressures of having to have these meetings last more than 2 hours means that some agencies and their reps have to leave for other things. And so we may not have as many agencies as we would hope, but I hope you will do what you're supposed to do, or we'll just go to fade to black. See, when these things don't work, the COO always takes the hit. All right, so please enter your information. We're going to distribute it. We're going to try to collect as much information as we can about collaborations and presentations and meetings that the organizations that we partner with and that we collaborate with put on so that we can continue to build energy. So while you're doing that, let me just ask you to note the next gathering in this series is April 19th. And it's back here. April 19th, the conversation will be entitled Community Engagement Matters. We talk a lot at the United Way about how many forms engagement can take and how do we corral and channel engagement, but it's Community Engagement Matters, and we will have Catherine Lawler, who's the Executive Director of ARCHI. For those of you who don't know what ARCHI is, it's the Atlanta Collaborative for Health Improvement. It's one of the initiatives that the United Way helped fuel and is involved in. And she will be accompanied by Paul Schmitz, who's the Senior Advisor at the Collective Impact Forum. We hope you find these sessions informative and helpful. We hope particularly you find them empowering. And we are very grateful for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you in April. Thanks very much. Thank you, guys.